All right, I'm back. And the plan for today is to do a lecture in preparation for the exam. This lecture will cover chapters 2, 3, and 4. All right, today is Friday. I'm so glad it's the end of the week. So glad it's the end of the week. And it is the 23rd, and it's a pretty day. And so it's a good day for a review for an exam. Okay, here it is. Exam 2 opens Tuesday the 27th at 8 a.m. and closes Thursday the 29th at 11:59. So, please, 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 please do not miss this exam. Please, please, please do not send me an email and say, oh, I had the wrong day. I really took the exam, but for some reason it didn't show up on Canvas because I can check with Canvas and see what happened. So I kind of know. So please, please, please be careful. And it will be coming into the office tomorrow, and I will be putting the exam on tomorrow. So it is worth 100 points. True, false, multiple choice, very similar to what you've had before. Respondus lockdown browser monitor is there. It will be on. I will take questions between now and the end of the day on Monday, but once the test opens, I cannot take questions. So, because then that wouldn't be fair to other people. So I ask that if you have questions, you get those to me before the test opens. Okay, I'm situating myself here so that I can get to my notes easily. I should have done that before now, hadn't I? Okay. All right. So, let's begin. Chapter 2 covers language acquisition, and it's the theories to how children acquire language. And to be real honest with you, we're not really sure how children learn language, how they acquire it, but we do know that there are different theories. What you will need to know for the exam, you will need to know nature versus nurture, for sure. You will have several questions on the test about nature versus nurture, the nativist and the behaviorist. You will need to know the important information such as the researcher, theorist, who is aligned with each one of those language theories. What is the difference between those language theories? What makes each theory significant? You will also need to understand operant conditioning, classical conditioning, who uses which one, why are they significant. You will need to know, let me flip through here. You will also need to know the transformational generative grammar information about that language acquisition device. I just mentioned operant and classical conditioning and how we go about putting operant and classical conditioning into place. What is significant about each one of those reinforcement systems? What are you trying to do? You're trying to change behavior is what you're trying to do. And you will need to know about Skinner's says that there are 5 specific functions defined by what children do. And if you look on page 27 of the PowerPoint, you will see echoic, tact, mand, intraverbal, and autoclitic. I would review that information. You need to review the socialist, interactionist view and what is significant about that. How is it different from the nativists and the behaviorists? Who is aligned with the nativists? Who is aligned with the behaviorists? You will need to know information about Vygotsky and the significance of Vygotsky's theories. Vygotsky his parents were pretty progressive because when he was in school, his learning was experiential, which means that he had a tutor that took him out into the world to teach him about everything. He was not traditionally in a classroom. It was purely through experiencing, doing, touching, smelling, problem solving, critical thinking. And so they were really pretty progressive. There are 2 slides on this in the PowerPoint. You will not be quizzed about anything over this slide about Fillmore, and you will not be quizzed about anything over this slide. It's page 30. It's those 2 slides. There isn't anything that will be covered there. The cognitive view and sensory motor development, of course, was a big issue, and that was Piaget, so you will have questions about Piaget. Motherese, parentese, fatherese, whatever you want to call it. There will be some questions about that and the significance, what it does, what do researchers think the purpose of that is, can we substantiate that? So chapter 2 is all about theory, the theory of language acquisition. And you have nativist, behaviorist, and social interactionist. So you will need to know the information regarding that. Chapter 3 is focused on cognitive development, building a foundation for language. And we start pretty much right away with Gardner and Gardner's intelligence. There are 8 multiple intelligences that he talks about, and he talks about the connection between cognition and language. And with these 8 multiple intelligences, I'm not going to ask you minute details, but the whole purpose behind what Gardner was doing was to say intelligence is more than just an IQ score. Intelligence is something that we have a particular talent for. And there are 8 areas. And he was saying that our ability to interact with the world includes many different pieces, and some of that is our particular talents. Review Piaget. He believed that cognitive development was both the result of genetics and environment. So I wonder which theory of language acquisition that goes along with. I would encourage you to understand how we store information in our brain regarding schema and those files and assimilation, accommodation, and equilibrium. It's a way that when somebody asks you something, let's say they ask you, do you remember when so-and-so did this? and they talked to, and what was that guy's name? What was his name? And so you sit there and you think and you think and you think, oh yeah, I sort of remember. And so you're trying to bring forth that information about someone so that you can enter into the conversation. And so the schematic is where you have filed information that you want to use later. Okay. Development, I think this is sort of important, is a continuing process of qualitative changes. Intellectual growth is a cumulative, integrative, and expanding process. It happens over time. Intellectual growth is a cumulative, integrative, expanding process. I certainly have questions on the exam regarding Piaget and the 4 stages of intellectual development. And I want to remind you the way that you can pick out information that might be important for you to know is if it says the most important stage is, the most significant change in this stage is, anything that lets you know that something is significant is worth noting. I don't want you to memorize information. What I want you to do is understand information and how it applies to language development and language processing and how different phases of development are interconnected. I want you to understand it, not memorize it. The 4 stages of intellectual development, according to Piaget, would be sensory motor intelligence, pre-operational thought, and an example of what I just said, cognitive development occurs rapidly. Well, that's important in language development, and that is sensory motor intelligence. Most rapid stage of language development, pre-operational thought. See, you find those important words, and that gives you the important information. Perception and cognition and language are integrated, they overlap. It's very difficult to have one without the other. We have talked about brain plasticity, and within that brain plasticity, you're able to take information, you're able to integrate it with other information, you're able to decipher what's important, what isn't important, you're able to connect it to something else, that brain plasticity. I would review those stages of Piaget. Even some of those sub-stages will have important information. Object permanence, causality, means end, imitation. There are sub-stages dealing with egocentricity, cooing, babbling, jargon, and true words. There are several pages on Piaget, and so I would definitely look through those. Vygotsky, the zone of proximal development, private speech, egocentric speech. You truly cannot separate cognition from perception. And I can't impress upon you enough the significance of brain plasticity, cognition, language, and perception, because that's the way we function all day long. We Somebody might say to you, "Well, what was your perception of what you read? What was your perception of what he said? What was your perception of that theory? How did you understand it?" Is what that means. And your perception many times is based on information that you have stored, information that you already know, and how you're going to add information. And then you have that cognition that helps us to take that information and to solve a problem, to think abstractly. And then you throw in the language and the intelligence to help you form an intelligent opinion, decision. They are so interconnected. The further into perception we proceed, the closer to cognition we get, until the line between them becomes blurred to the point of elimination. This is the way perception is described in your text. Perception refers to the processes by which a person selects, organizes, integrates, and interprets the sensory stimuli he receives. And I think the example that I maybe gave you in class was the difference between the ringing of the doorbell and the ringing bell on your stove when the pizza's done. Those are both bells, but can you perceive, what did you perceive that bell to be? What did you perceive this bell to be? Well, you're basing that on some information that you've had. So you're using some brain plasticity, you're using some cognition, you're using some intelligence, you're comparing, you're analyzing, you're integrating, it's all based on the perception and language. What is the first sensory system that children control? I certainly would look at that information out of chapter 3 and the importance of that visual stimulation. We know we're at 7.5, 8 inches from mother's face, and that infant is very much enthralled with mother's face and the angles and the movement and mother's smell and the pitch of her voice and the touch of her hand. There is definitely a connection between joint attention and bonding. When the mother, caregiver, father doesn't bond with the child, you have potentially some mental health problems. Auditory perception, we know there's a period between 16 and 19 months that is especially critical for word learning, and we're listening to sounds around us. Infants show a greater interest in the human voice than in other noises. Very early on, they're able to localize sound and tell you if it comes from the left, from the right, is it up, is it down, is it back? And they can make these gross discriminations. Children and adults both will need the visual component and the auditory component to determine speech sounds, because you're not only listening to what the person is saying, but you're watching their mouths. You're watching how they're forming sounds in words. So we use both auditory and visual perception to determine speech. We experience better understanding of someone else when we are able to see their faces. The information on executive function, for those of you who want to be in the general education classroom, executive function is impacted in a negative way if we've got some poor attention skills. When executive function works poorly, children are affected socially and academically in more of a negative way, certainly not a positive way. There is a very slow maturation process with executive function, and we're using a lot of inner language. With executive function, it's what keeps you on task, it keeps you on target, it keeps you doing what you're supposed to be doing to stay out of trouble. You can keep track of when you have projects due, you can keep track of when the next test is. You know what you're supposed to read, you know when you're supposed to go to the doctor. It keeps all of this life information organized. Attention and memory develop gradually. Most of the important pieces do. Review controlled attention, working memory, and look at executive functioning and bilingual acquisition. All right, that's chapter 3. Let's go on to chapter 4, and this is the most recent chapter, so it's going to be fresher in your mind. We know, and this chapter is birth to 2, and this is a very crucial time for language development. We know that drastic changes in communication occur in the first 2 years of life. Comprehension is vital for language development and language production. We do have a section on considering socioeconomic factors that may impact a child's ability to develop fully or to their best ability. We know we're looking at socioeconomic status, we're looking at gender, we're looking at marriage and two-parent homes, we're looking at poverty, we're looking at race. We have lots of factors that play into language and learning, and that can impact the child's readiness for language. There are 7 variables. They're listed on page 63. Children living in the South and the Eastern regions of the United States are most affected by poverty. It's a more comfortable climate, especially in the South, and individuals will move there to find work, maybe in construction, and the weather is conducive to maybe lower utility bills because you aren't running a furnace, but if you have an air conditioner, that may compensate for that. Some families who go there, I don't know if housing is cheaper, but there are tent communities in the South, and I think that it probably would be cheaper if you were just starting out trying to get your feet on the ground, but certainly I can't say that that's probably something that a lot of people would want to stay in for very long. At least 16% of children in every state live in poverty. When we talk about poverty, you have to think about marital status. Single women raising children are the most vulnerable. Review the Hart and Risley study and the Lena Foundation study. and the key findings from those studies, the results for the key findings, and recommendations that you could give to parents. I really do think that the information that I have on most of the slides is really the meat of the chapter, and I've tried to give you the most important points, and hopefully just if you were keeping up and you were reading the PowerPoint slides and you've read them more than once, don't wait till the last minute. It doesn't work. It's not going to help you. It's some of it is just good old common sense that, oh yeah, well, they coo first, then they babble, and then they have jargon, and then you have true words. But I think if you are just reviewing these slides and looking at this information, and you've reviewed it several times, I'd look at it every day and not wait until the last minute. Please review Brown's stages of syntactical development. In this chapter 4 is only looking at stage 1. Review information on morphemes, free morphemes, bound morphemes, and derivational or inflectional. There is some information on mean length of utterance, and it's the calculation of the average number of morphemes a child produces in a sample utterance. You don't need to spend too much time on open and pivot words. Review the 3 functions of early sentences. That's on page 85. And that's it. I think that the information is the meat of the chapters. If you've kept up with the lecture, if you've reviewed the information, I think that you should be in pretty good shape. I will take questions until the test opens on Tuesday. So let me know if you have questions, and we will go from there. Good luck on the exam, and remember, it opens on Tuesday. Bye.